Great. Good morning. Welcome back to Daybreak on this 15th day of April 2019. We're here to talk about what's in the news review, looking at what's making headlines in the papers and, of course, different media platforms over the weekend and, of course, this morning. My name is Sam Gituku.
And my name is Zinze Kibiku. It's always a pleasure to have you with us this morning. Sam, would you like to introduce our panel before we go through the
Great. So, Senator Leda Molekina from Narok, karibu sana.
Good morning.
William Kamket, Member of Parliament for Tiati, karibu sana to the show.
Good morning.
Jonathan Mweke, former Governor Nairobi. Welcome back. It's been quite a season. Former Deputy Governor. Okay, former Deputy Governor Nairobi. Karibu sana. And Senator Kimani Wamatangi from Kiambu. Welcome back to the show. You've been away for so long. I don't know what you've been cooking in Kiambu.
Well, I've been gathering news and information.
Yes, so now you're here to unpack it.
Absolutely.
Great. So we'll be taking a look at different stories, but starting with what's making headlines in the papers, you see that on the front page of the Standard, petrol, diesel prices shoot up. Shortage. There's a shortage that has been predicted here. A combination of delay in global import and price increase by ERC today complicates smooth supply in pump stations. We'll be looking at some of the details that are in as far as that story is concerned. Still on the front page, 20 targeted as plot on Ruto allies moves to houses. Number of DP's allies with security will be withdrawn. Will be withdrawn. I don't know whether that's true. Will be withdrawn. Increases as sources reveal some of them will be stripped of their lucrative positions in Parliament.
All right, and that's just on the Standard newspaper. Let me take you through the Daily Nation. Auditor General Edward Woko is saying that he's set to clear controversial Eurobond deal. He says no evidence. This is after the teams were dispatched on a fact-finding mission to Europe and US, said to have returned empty-handed. May I just remind our viewers that this Eurobond we're discussing about is the one for 2014, and yet this is 2019. We're looking to borrow another Eurobond standing at 250 billion Kenyan shillings. That is the one that is being floated. The last one was back in 2018 with 200 billion Kenyan shillings. And of course, the talks on focus on how counties will share cash. And if you're a fan of golf, Tiger Woods bounces back. All right.
Now he's out of the woods.
He's not. Touché. Wow, Sam.
On the back page of the Daily Nation, MPs defy Muturi on links with witnesses. Legislators have been accused of escorting and taking photos with probe subjects. We will be talking briefly about that topic. And most importantly, Zinzi is showing me something on the back page of the Daily Nation.
Yes, 150 million set aside to help avert floods.
Yeah, it's a good thing. We don't need floods.
All right, it's a very interesting
But we need the rain first.
Let us begin this conversation.
All right, so let's begin with what's close to the hearts of Kenyans, and that is on the petroleum prices. You see that on page 4 of the Standard, that the price of petrol is going up by 5 shillings and a few cents now to retail at, is it 106 shillings in Nairobi? And diesel at 102 and a few cents, and then kerosene will be 102 shillings. 22 cents. So we are being given reasons and of why this review has come, and reports indicating that by Friday last week, the stocks that are in the country were about 21 million tons of petrol, and what we need every day is 3.6 million tons of petrol. So that what we have cannot last us a week. Is it just a trend that petroleum prices has to go down then start going up progressively, or is there a hidden hand that we are not seeing in these prices that now we have to pay for at the pump?
Zinzi and Sam, I feel very sorry for Kenyans. I sit in the Energy Committee in the Senate, and one of the biggest problems we've been looking at is the issue of KPC and the challenges that KPC has been facing for a very long time. I feel sorry for Kenyans because there seems to be an orchestrated plan to really punish Kenyans with the price of fuel. If you look at this, it's almost like a scandal between the insurance companies, the oil marketers, you know, and also ERC to some extent. When you look at the spillages in the oil industry, in most cases, what the insurance companies agreed with or negotiated with KPC is that they will pay anything about 0.25% losses, which is subject to, all types of spillages, whether it is theft or whether it is just evaporation or water contamination or anything. But in most cases, the oil marketers have been compensated up to the rate of 0.25%. And that price is on pass to Wanjiko, which is something which is illegal. And I remember the young man, Joe Sang and his team, the guys who are in court now, they tried to argue that the only way we can be able to save Kenyans from this increase in the prices is by ensuring that we calculate the actual loss. And when you look at the actual loss, in terms of the losses that we lost last year through line 4, which is a very dilapidated line, and I think all the other lines apart from line 5, which is a new line now, it was about 0.17%. So in actual sense, the oil marketers have been compensated up to the ceiling of 0.25%, and that price on pass to the consumers. So at any given time, you know, I find it very weird that ERC will proceed and ensure that they charge customers more money without actually looking at all factors. Because it is not only about the import price. We look at the dollar has been very, very stable in terms of the currency. The problem is that this seems to be a well-orchestrated scheme to ensure that they continue punishing Kenyans. And when young Kenyans come up and say, no, stop this, they end up being targeted.
Right.
And we will continue seeing an increase in the oil prices, you know, if we cannot be able to handle this issue of the oil sector diligently and with a clear aim and end in protecting the consumer.
Right.
So when you talk about that the shortage that we have in the country is informing this particular increase, I mean, what are we not doing? Because obviously we know that the country has a certain demand, if it's every day or every week. Why are we not planning in advance so that we don't have, like currently we've been told that there was some shortage in areas like Lamu County, there was no petroleum products available for people there. The small traders, they are not having access to the same. What are we not doing that we should be doing?
There is a saying that water everywhere, but no water to drink. I believe what is happening here is that we have a situation of hoarding, and that is the problem with this country. Everything is run by cartels, literally everything. So I think what needs to be done as a people and as a government is to deal with the cartels that influence the hoarding of oil, and to ensure that they do not continue with this business of hoarding in order to fleece Kenyans. That's what I have to say on this matter. Yeah.
All right, and you've brought up a very good point, the issue of hoarding. We have seen in the past, and it seems to be a scheme that is well played within the oil industry, where you create a shortage, and hence that. What is the point, what is the job of ERC in making sure that that scheme where you hoard and then the fuel prices go up, therefore affecting Wanjiko, how is ERC supposed to make sure that that scheming, that play role, that hoarding is dealt with accordingly? He has given a good solution of taming the cartels, but what more needs to be done?
Well, ERC is exactly that. They're the regulator, and their job is to make sure that the oil marketers don't take advantage of the consumer.
Right.
Yeah, that they were actually, they got their mandate when prices used to go up differently by different oil marketers depending on what their strategy was, either in holding the fuel, creating artificial shortages, and so on. So what the ERC now did through Parliament's law is said, we will be determining what the price of fuel is, and that closed the loophole from the oil marketers from raising prices whenever they felt like, depending on issues that didn't even affect them to raise the prices. So now the oil marketers, especially the larger ones, like MP from Tiati has said, have now decided, since they're the ones that have the financial muscle to import a bulk of the fuel, then they set higher prices for the other independent stations. Yeah, through this holding. So they say the petrol is not available. We have not imported enough. So now the independent oil stations, the non-branded ones, if you will, raise their prices so that they can get fuel just to keep their businesses going. Now that's what the ERC should be doing to investigate and find out these large oil marketers, if really they're creating artificial shortages, then they should be fined as per the law. But also what the senator from Narok said is very important about the spillages. There's 0.25% allowed for spillage. That is passed on to the consumer. But what this whole cartel, if you will, have done is they pay out that 0.25% every month and pass it on to the customer, whether or not there is a spillage. And that's something also that needs to be investigated, because it's creating inefficiencies in the pricing
What
of fuel.
determines the prices of fuel in just a global market? Is it the drillers? Is it the petrol companies? Is it a government? Is it the ERCs of countries? What exactly determines the price? Is it the normal demand and supply?
Sure.
Well, usually it's OPEC. Yeah, the major
International
countries. Yeah, the major countries who provide the fuel. So they sit together, and depending on their supply, demand, depending on world economics, with some of the global players like the United States and so on, depending on the exchange rate. You had somebody here mention the dollar has been stable. That's what sometimes fluctuates the price of fuel. But in Kenya, which is quite unfortunate, and I hope the lawmakers here can make a point of that, is half the price of fuel is in levies and taxes. So really, half of the fuel that we pay for, the price of the fuel that we pay for, just goes to government taxes and levies. So those are the inefficiencies that keep making fuel prices go up, which also increases the standard of living.
Let me rope in Senator Kimani. This issue of the abuse of dominance with the brands that are in the market. The big players are the ones that import a lot of the oil that we see. So they're the ones who sort of have a touch and go when it comes to the supply within a country. So that abuse of dominance, what does it do to the common pocket of Mwananchi when you have the big players taking part of that?
No, I don't know whether you would call it abuse of dominance right now, because if you look at the history of the oil business or oil trading, right from the very old ages of Standard Oil in the US, it was many days ago, from the times of Rockefeller up to today, and then since the emergence of OPEC and so on, the oil industry is really a very closely controlled industry by very few players. One, it's because of the magnitude of resources that are required to be invested in oil. And the evidence of that, you can find it even locally. Since when we discovered our oil in Turkana, ask yourself, how much headway have we made in bringing that oil to the surface and making use of it? So you find that by dint and implication of what you need to invest to be able to make useful business in that industry, that limits it to very few. And then I think that's why we would be asking ourselves, for example, now that, as my colleagues here have said, that we have the scenario that we have, and we know that all the time we have to deal with the prevailing circumstances, what have we done? And you could ask yourself, what, for example, is the role of National Oil Corporation, which was formed intentionally to be able to be a middle player that would take care of the interests of the ordinary, as the big players also have their share of the market. And I believe we've not exploited that fully. For example, ask yourself, what is our retention capacity at Kipevu, in Nairobi, and in Eldoret, in all the storages we have, given the amount of fuel, as one of my colleagues said, that we know we must need. Somebody made a very interesting thought sometimes in a discussion on what dangers sometimes we pose to ourselves. Somebody said, if, for example, and God forbid, there was an attack in our jetty in Mombasa, just one day, it would take a maximum of 3 days for this country to grind to a halt. Such that, we rely entirely on the incoming and feeding into the system and consume. Such that in 3 days we can find ourselves without any oil. And so I believe what we would need to look at is what strategies, what incentives, and what push do we need to give, for example, to National Oil Corporation, for example, to ERC, so that then we can broaden our base. And lastly, if you look at how then that industry works, most of the main players and countries that have managed to regulate this have specific strategies. For example, like if you go to Singapore, if you go to other countries like Malaysia, you find that they have a huge offshore business whereby they have even tankers floating around. They are full of oil, just waiting for that time. Others have made long-term contracts with these big players such that you invest in them and you're able to hold large stocks of oil that you have booked in advance such that you can mitigate scenarios like what we have. So I believe it's really the strategizing, but because most of key people, and I say that of course with a clear conscience, are also involved in the profiteering of this trade. That's why you find that it's not very easy for us to be able to win that war and have a strategy that's good for the common person.
Senator, you've touched on Turkana. Do you think when and if we do start, when we get a buyer, first of all, when we start pumping the oil, that at some point as a nation we'll have a bit more flexibility when it comes to the prices? No, perhaps will be a bit more friendly by the time we are drilling and selling our own oil?
Well, I think that is a possibility, but I don't think as a person that we've even shown the right signs. For example, I mean, if you look at some of the things we started doing just at this mention that there's a discovery of oil, I mean, we started seeing guys on the road with AK-47s blocking trucks and saying that if you don't pay this, you're not going to let you go to Nairobi and take your oil. And then if you bring these guys with this kind of skin or this language here, they're coming to take over our assets. I mean, we could very easily become the Nigerian story, or you know, as it has happened in so many countries where the discovery of oil becomes the Waterloo of that country. And I believe that unless very carefully controlled, and unless we approach it very carefully, we could, at the end of the day, even become worse. But hopefully, we approach it with the right mindset. Then it can be useful to us. There are countries that have done well. For example, look at Norway. Norway is one of the world's largest sovereign fund holders that guarantees all their citizens a clean future, a healthy future, just because of the investment they did correctly in only the oil discovery that they did. And theirs is not even on land, it is in the sea.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are two issues that I would want us to focus on just before we get out of this topic. And first of all, there's something you raised about the stocks that we have are only can only sustain us for a very short time. We read from the story on the Standard that we're expecting that 25 million tons will be docking or be received towards the end of this week, and then next week we receive another 80 million tons of petroleum products. So what do we need to do? Because when you look at other services, we have strategic food reserves so that in case there's a shortage we can rush and resolve the crisis. How about fuel? Isn't it time that we looked at how to get some strategic fuel reserve so that we can cushion the consumers?
I think there's one thing that we have to do. One, we have to be able to put away politics and witch hunting in the issue of oil in this country. If you look at the whole story about the Kisumu jetty, when you go through the documentation, you will notice that it was a presidential directive to be able to ensure that that Kisumu jetty is put in place so that when fuel is transported from the Mombasa jetty all the way, all the lines will be able to feed and the entire country will be able to have enough oil. I am very suspect of any oil marketer saying that we're going to have a shortage, yet at any given time, there's a lot of fuel in the pipelines. So I think what we need to do is to make sure that we carry out clear audits, we replace the old pipes which are there. Like in fact, if you look at line 4 is a disaster. Several spillages all over. So once we have our strategic reserve properly taken care of, the Kisumu oil jetty has enough oil. You know, the Mombasa one has enough oil. And then when we are honest with each other, then I think we're going to be able to solve this problem. But the moment we now start, you know, sort of like, you know, trying to attack certain individuals for doing their job, because maybe they are cutting loopholes of you stealing money or corruption in the whole process, then we will never be able to proceed. You know?
Let's take a look at one feedback, a tweet from who? Can you have a look at that? Well, as we get that to it, the other question is, when you look at the prices, okay, fine. Humphrey says that don't they think this is a big mess to normal Mwananchi? At this time, we're experiencing shortage of rain, plus now shortage of fuel. As you respond to that, there's this reality that we now talk about kerosene being more expensive than diesel, because kerosene is 102 shillings 22 cents and then diesel is 102 13 cents. The reason why it is so, we were told that it is to cure adulteration of fuel, yes, especially for diesel. Has it worked? And are we trying to cure crime by punishing Mwananchi?
No, really, I just wanted to mention the issue of the strategic reserve first. I agree with you. There is need to have a strategic fuel reserve in the country, so that we are not only depending on fuel on the wheels. There are attendant dangers to that, because fuel is a very highly perishable commodity in terms of storage. So there are issues that needs to be addressed in that matter. So indeed, yes, we need to have a strategic fuel reserve in the country moving forward. But then, like my colleague here has mentioned, the problem in this country is that whenever an idea comes up of trying to solve a problem, somebody else sees an opportunity to steal from it. And that is the problem we have in this country. And that's why we really have to rethink how we manage our affairs and try to set the bar higher in terms of leadership. Because whenever we want to do something good, some crooked individuals see an opportunity to steal. And that is the problem we have in this country.
Right. Honorable John, yes, I was even coming to you.
Yes.
Because Senator Kimani really said something important, the fact that perhaps we can look like Singapore, where we have our oil reserves in the ocean.
Yes.
But how doable is that as a nation, the fact that we can have some of our oil reserves in the ocean? Are we capable of doing it, making sure that we're also preserving the ecosystem within the ocean while managing to secure our oil?
It can be done, but it's extremely expensive. And what happens sometimes is, if you have a solution that is very costly, for us just to have strategic oil reserves floating around waiting for a shortage could be a very expensive affair for our country.
Right.
I'm not sure we can afford it. But what we can do is create some efficiencies. And that's why I keep coming to this issue of institutions in our country. If we had the ERC as an institution work, then we won't need to increase the price of kerosene to stop the adulteration. Yeah? If you went right now to put petrol in your piki or diesel in your canter, and the engine stops because that petrol station you went to had served you fuel that has been mixed with other impurities like kerosene, what do you do as a consumer? Yeah? And when you report that, first of all, who do you report to? If it gets to the ERC, what action do they take? Do they shut the station down? Do they send the owner to court, who eventually goes to jail? Do they scrap a license? Those are the institutions that are supposed to make sure crimes like that, because those are crimes, don't happen. Yeah? Then you have National Oil again as an institution, like Senator Wamatangi said very correctly. So it's a government-owned entity that's supposed to be a check and balance to these other big oil marketers who could do one or two shortcuts so that their profits go up.
Right.
So if they play around with the demand and the supply, government has enough muscle through National Oil to ensure that National Oil is well stocked, their petrol stations, and that they keep the price down so that they don't either hold fuel or they don't extort from the Mwananchi. And if that happens, then the laws of demand and supply kick in. Everybody will go to National Oil because they have cheaper fuel, because they never run dry. The government has put that check and balance. Yeah? Right. So there's all these institutions. Then you have our Achilles heel in the energy sector here, Kenya Pipeline. It's been the hotbed of scandals in this country for decades because it's a cash cow where people just profit from it. So if Kenya Pipeline as an institution had people who are there, professionals, not just politicians who pick their people to come in and still, like Honorable Kamket is saying, yeah. And Kenya Pipeline was efficient in the way the distribution of fuel is done in the country,
right?
And you don't have this 5 billion shillings of jet fuel is missing. There's this spillage that doesn't exist, or there's this pipeline that was built at 10 times the cost. All that,
actually,
all these are
just
factors that affect
your, right. We need
your
to take
supply, your quality, and your price of fuel. So institutions need to work.
Let me just comment on that, because I think it is very important to demystify these things. The issue of the pipeline, if you actually look at it, that pipeline was built with what was budgeted for it to be built. And it has actually saved Kenya quite a lot of money. When I sit at the Energy Committee, I look at documents over documents and documents to be able to come up with a conclusion. And in fact, Kenya Pipeline now is the only institution, apart from CAK, which is making a lot of money for this country. Last year alone, it made over 12 billion in profit. So I think what I've noticed going on is that when young Kenyans come in and they try and say no to this corruption, they are now attacked by corruption. Because people are not happy with the situation where an institution is making money and they are doing well. If that institution comes in and say, we will no longer pay the oil marketers 0.25%, which is what has been agreed by the TSA in terms of the insurance, we will pay them the actual losses, then it becomes a problem. So I think we have got to separate facts from fiction. What is actually happening now in this country is that the government, particularly the president, ought to really try to find a way to protect these institutions that my colleague is talking about here. We have to protect these institutions and then make sure we don't have other people outside or who are in the system who have been making a lot of money, who can be able to come in and say, this is where the problem is, but they do not, but once they're told where the problem is, they want to shift goals.
Of course, there are pending cases in court. For instance,
and you know, that is something that really annoys me, because when you look at the facts, you know, facts are very stubborn. Whatever is presented to us at the committee, we go through documents and documents. But then when the question is, either the oil marketers they met in Serena for like a long period of time negotiating what they should be paid. Instead of them agreeing to be paid the actual losses, they demand they must be paid 0.25%, which is a ceiling. All
right, I know, Mweke, you wanted to respond, but of course, there are several issues, obviously. There is what he's talking about. There is the case that is before court about 6 hydrant pit valves for Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. There are the questions about that pipeline that you're talking about, whose cost was inflated. So a lot of things going around. Of course, you may not agree, but the fact of the matter is that some of these matters are in court, so we'll await for the determination to find the ultimate solution to it. Now, we need to take a short break, but you can text us your views on 22422. You can call us on 0719
777
or 0742 961343. You can tweet us at Citizen TV Kenya, at Sam Gituku, and at
Zinzi_K. When we come back, page 6 and 7, more Ruto allies lose guards as fight goes to Parliament. Just to complement that story, MPs accuse Ruto of dividing Jubilee. That's just a taste of what's coming up. We'll dive straight into the politics after this commercial break.
Right.